Hey, everybody. Welcome to A Mighty Blaze. I'm Jenna Blum, one of the co-founders of The Blaze, and today I am so excited to have my dear friend Henriette Lazaridis with me to talk about her amazing new historical fiction, which I can't see with my ski goggles on, TERRA NOVA. Welcome, Henriette.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Why are you laughing? I
No.
always look like this. It's winter. There is actually a reason that I am wearing these ski goggles, which will become abundantly clear shortly, and my Russian hat. Meanwhile, let me welcome everybody to The Blaze. If you're already part of Blaze Nation, thank you for joining us today and bringing your light to The Blaze. As always, bringing the party. If you're new to The Blaze, I don't always wear ski goggles and a Russian hat, first of all. Second of all, welcome. Blaze is a team of 35 creative professional volunteers dedicated to linking writers with their readers in the age of COVID, Delta, Omicron, monkeypox, endemic, whatever, and beyond. We are so excited to put writers online in this digital age so they can reach their audiences. If you like what you see here, please give us a like, a follow on Facebook, on Instagram, on YouTube, on Book Talk. We are ubiquitous. And please consider signing up for our newsletter at www.amightyblaze.com so you'll never have literary FOMO ever again. No mo FOMO. Nobody likes that. And now I am so excited to welcome today's very special guest, Henriette. So, Henriette, are you ready for your official bio?
I am, yes.
Good. I'm going to take these off so I can actually read. Oh, hello, you're here. Great. I feel like the kid in the Christmas story. Okay, so here is your official bio. Buckle up. It's you. Henriette Lazaridis is the author of Clover House, which I loved, a Boston Globe-bestseller, and TERRA NOVA, which we are here to talk about today, which is so freaking good, you guys. You should pre-order. Actually order because it launched yesterday. Please order at least 50 or 60 copies. She is published in Elle, The Millions, New York Times, Huffington Post, New England Review, Salamander, and Forge, and Henriette is a Rhodes Scholar. She has taught at Harvard, Grub Street Writers, and her very own Kruna. Am I saying that right? Kruna workshop. Kruna. I was doing it wrong. Kruna workshop in Greece. Today, again, we are celebrating and introducing TERRA NOVA, which is world-class chef kiss historical fiction about two Antarctic explorers trying to get to the South Pole before anybody else, and the woman who loves them both. Although she may love herself, I think, even a little bit more, or does she? Who's she going to choose in the end? So, full disclosure, I've known Henriette for years and years. We both teach at Grub Street. She was in my novel workshop forever. Her work is so luscious, so smart, so beautiful. And we were just arguing about this in the green room. I know I read TERRA NOVA before it was a book because I remember sitting on my front porch at my Minnesota house and reading the end of the book and just being like blown away by it, which we won't talk about without spoilers. But anyway, like it's such a good book. I have been describing it ever since I first laid eyes on it, which you don't remember, but I did, as Jack London had a baby with Anita Shreve. And it's about suffragism and art and has this incredibly muscular, like male storyline that to me is like an adventure storyline with Captain Haywood and Watts trying to get to the South Pole. And then also this very like physically aware struggle, a woman's struggle to find out who she really is and to define who she really is. That feels to me like that Anita Shreve, like super body consciousness, and also like the consciousness of women's issues. So that's my description of the book. How would you describe your own book?
I would say that it's a story of these two Antarctic explorers who are ambitious in the way that men in 1910 were able to be ambitious. And Viola is sort of like the Penelope character who stays home while, Odysseus is making his adventurous way back from, and I believe the Trojan War. As a good Greek, I really can't believe I'm blanking on this, but I thought of Viola as a sort of Penelope character who, Penelope in the Odyssey weaves a tapestry and tells the suitors who are waiting for her to marry one of them, she tells them that when her tapestry is finished, she'll marry the suitor. But every night, she unravels what she's woven during the day. So she's prolonging this, postponing this. and prolonging her own freedom. And so I thought of Viola as that character. So this isn't a very pithy description of the book, but it's so the two Antarctic explorers, and they're the woman who stays home in London, who is trying to do her own exploration as an artist, as a woman, in an artistic sphere and the political sphere of suffrage at the same time.
In 1910 in London.
In 1910.
Everybody. Okay, so give us like the super pithy pitch.
Why did you? That's about as pithy as I get. The pithy version of the pitch is that there's these two men doing their exploring, and this woman is doing her own exploring while they're away, and she's realizing that she wants them both to come back. She wants them to be both well, even though she's trying to figure out what she's going to do when they both come back, if they both survive. She wants them to come back, but she also kind of doesn't want them to come back, because when they do, she will have to stop doing some of the stuff that she's doing. She'll have to confront the possibility of stopping her involvement with the suffrage movement. She might not be able to do the exhibition that she's beginning to develop. So it's that sort of tension between rivalry and artistic ambition, love, rivalry between and among artists, and exploration of different kinds, physical exploration, artistic exploration, all of those.
Yes. And is it a spoiler to say what her relationship to the two men is?
No, because you find out very early on that she is having an affair with Watts, James Watts, who is the expedition photographer, while she is married to Edward Heywood, who is the expedition leader. Mm-hmm. And the men don't know this. Her feeling is that she wants to be able to love two men. She feels that she loves them both equally and differently. And yet she's not being completely honest about it, because if she really felt that it was truly okay, you wonder, why is she keeping it a secret? Why hasn't she told her husband about this affair? She's contemplating that. But you learn this within the first 25 pages.
Mm-hmm. And thank goodness this is not like an explosive secret that might detonate while people are trying to survive in these extremely inhospitable other planetary conditions getting to the South Pole. Can you tell us, actually, I want to read a tiny bit of this, unless you would like to do it, but I am so struck by, guys, if you're like, oh yeah, women's suffrage, women artistic, love affair, blah, 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 that doesn't hook you in. You should buy this book for the adventure quality alone, because it is so fantastic. Like Henriette's writing about Antarctica and the physical requirements of survival in this atmosphere are so stunning. And also, just as an author who generally writes female protagonists, but also has written a male protagonist, and hope I did it convincingly, I am so struck that James Watts, the photographer, narrates like half of this book. And it is so incredibly freaking convincing. I would love to ask you about that. But first, I would love to ask you just to read the first page if you want to.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Surprise. It's reading hour.
All right. Okay. Soon they will have to send Tite and Lawrence back. There is no longer enough food for 4 of them. The men will protest, but it will be no secret that they will be crying behind their sun goggles, tears of relief freezing into grains of ice in the corners of their eyes. Watts catches himself. Their bodies are too desiccated for tears. There is no weeping in this place so stripped of human life. There is only cold. Cold like a presence they breathe, and like a force to hold them down, hold them in place, even as they inch over endless swales of white and gray, gray-white, blue-white. He wants to curse now, again, at this cruel palette. His lenses struggle to find nuance in this stark world, the camera eye narrowed to a pinprick, and even that almost too much for his glass plates. There is only contrast here, white and black, and darker black, and brighter, impossibly brighter white.
Good. And I'm just going to read a little bit more, because this is the part that made me know that I was in the presence of like a master novelist who has really projected herself into the minds of her characters so much that I am there too. And I forget I'm reading a book. So I'm going to read this. So enjoy. Okay. Watts fumbles in his clothing for his notebook, slipped inside the linen pouch he keeps around his neck. He pulls the graphite stick but drops it and scrabbles at the edges of his bag, fingertips already beginning to harden from mere proximity to the ice beneath, and retrieves the stick. Haywood has not stirred. Watts rolls onto his stomach, the sour tang of the seal pelt thick in his lungs, and riffles the grubby pages. At the beginning of the little book is the list he began to keep when they made landfall. Curiosity sighted, penguin, seal, albatross, a band of vivid turquoise water at the base of a coastal berg. He was all eyes then, eager for the pole's new vastness. With time, he added to his list: spit, piss, shit, cum, blood. Things that froze, one by one, elements of his body that this place had overpowered. It is as good a chronicle of their time here as any other, but this is no language for the Geographical Society. If they live, they will have to find other words with which to tell the tale. And I love many aspects of this book. Like, it's one of my favorite books, honestly. But when I read that, and I remember reading it long ago, and then again with the recent reread, I just thought, how did you know this? I mean, one assumes that you didn't actually trek to the South Pole and back. So can you tell us a little bit about how you recreated the physical atmosphere and how incredibly damaging and challenging it is?
Well, I've never been in temperatures like that. I've been in some pretty cold temperatures, but nothing like the coldest that it gets in Antarctica. And I was supposed to go to Antarctica after the book was done, but I was supposed to go last year. And as it is, I'm going next year. But I've been very cold enough times to be able to think about what it feels like. I know that your eyelids do kind of tap together when they get really cold. I mean, that just happens. And I know I've had frostbite. I know what it's like when your fingertips get sort of waxy white, and then the pain of the thawing again. So I sort of intensified and extrapolated what I knew from my own experiences and what I had grown up reading about explorers. But I made a point when I decided I was going to embark on writing this book, which was December of 2015, like December 2nd of 2015. I stopped looking at any of the Antarctic related materials, many of which are on the shelf but behind me here. I stopped looking at those because I didn't want my language to be influenced at all by the very articulate prose of people like Scott himself or Apsley Cherry Garrard, who wrote the book. It's a big fat tome on that shelf there, the dark one, called The Worst Journey in the World. So it was more taking my own experiences and intensifying them. And then vaguely kind of using what I knew from almost an entire lifetime of following Antarctic explorers, kind of always checking in with what was going on in that world and rereading from time to time those materials.
It sounds like The Worst Journey in the World was kind of your Bible in a way to develop the project, in the same way that when I was working on World War II fiction, Rise and Fall of the Third Reich, like similarly beefy, was mine. Can you tell us a little bit about your early interest in Antarctic exploration and how did this come about?
Yeah, so when I know that I was 7 years old because I went searching for this documentary to see when did this air on PBS? And there was a documentary about Robert Falcon Scott and his race against Roald Amundsen to be the first of the South Pole. And it aired when I was 7. And my parents, I suppose, were watching PBS and I was watching with them. And I saw this documentary and I was very taken with Robert Scott. And I'm pretty sure I didn't realize the mistakes he made, the flawed nature of his leadership, the fact that he went to the South Pole, but then died. The 5 men, he and the 4 other men of his polar party, died on the way back. I don't think I remember that, but I came away from that documentary with this sense of this hero who had adventured in snow with skis on. And I'd already been skiing 4 years by this point, by the age of 7. And I loved snow and I loved skiing. And so here was this hero. And I just kind of imprinted on him like a duckling. And we got a puppy not long after I saw that documentary. And I remember declaring to my parents that if he likes the snow, we will name him Scott. And we got the dog in October. I didn't wait. We named him Scotty. He was Scotty. He was my dog. He was like my best friend when I was growing up. And I just kept holding this idea of Robert Scott, the explorer, in my mind. And I would imagine myself, like anytime I was out in the woods, I played in the woods a lot by myself and with my dog and with friends. Anytime I was out in the snow, part of me was thinking, well, you're just like Robert Falcon Scott. You're skiing, it's getting cold and you're gonna, but I got to come inside and warm up, but it was like, oh, it's getting cold. I got really bad frostbite when I was 10 and it was like, oh, just like Scott. I had a blister on my ear. I had to wear a hat for like a month. Anytime the temperature went below 50, the doctor said she's going to have to wear a knit hat, even though it's, May. But even that was like, oh, just like my hero. So anyway, that's a long way of saying that's how it sort of started. And then as the years passed, I kept thinking about Antarctica. And this is back when like nobody went to Antarctica. You didn't go as a tourist. And I would occasionally say like, gosh, I wonder if I could ever go. Like, how would I go? And then like fast forward, we got to a point where I had like teenage kids and they would look at me and they knew that I was always getting cold. I was always getting frostbite or frost nip or something like that. And they'd look at me and they'd say, you can't go to Antarctica. You'll get cold and you'll die. This was the refrain. Like it was almost like a call and response that we played out over the years. And then I kept thinking, well, so Scott was noble. He did the right thing. He got to the South Pole. He saw Roald Amundsen's flag. He wrote in his journal something like, well, this is a great disappointment. I'm very sorry that our party has come this far only to be defeated, or some noble words to that effect. And I thought, well, this is great, but what if you weren't a noble person? What if you got to the South Pole and you saw your rival's flag and you decided to behave unethically? And then because photography is such an important part of at least my appreciation of Antarctic exploration, because Herbert Ponting, Frank Hurley, all these photographers were unbelievably good at capturing the shapes and the environment of Antarctica. I started thinking about, of course, photography would have to play a role in this unethical behavior. And I know that I've said this in other places too, that what popped into my mind, it is true. It sounds ridiculous, but the Antonioni film Blow Up popped into my mind. And if you know that movie, the photographer, he's David Hemmings, he's in a park in London. He's doing a fashion shoot. Vanessa Redgrave, she's like 22 years old or something. She's the model. He's back in his darkroom, enlarging his photographs, and he sees that a murder has been committed. There's like a body in one of the pictures. And the more he enlarges the pictures, the more he sees what was really going on in that park. So I thought about that. And then I put those things together and had the beginnings of the story, or the beginnings of part of the story.
What part did you start with? What was the
men? The words I just read were the first words I wrote at 5 o'clock in the morning or thereabouts on like December 2nd of 2015, because I sat at the same table I'm sitting at now, under a very dim light, without my glasses on, writing longhand, like in the dark, because I felt like I had to shake up everything about my writing routine, because I had had a manuscript that had not sold. And I was skittish about starting this new book. So I said, I'm starting to get anxious about this. I've got to start, because the more I wait, the harder it's going to be to begin. So you got to do it. You got to do it. Rip off the Band-Aid and start by doing everything different. So that's what I started with. And I started with that sentence: soon they will have to send Tite and Lawrence back, and wrote all the men's section over the next 4 months. And I write longhand and I date the pages. And this is why I know when I wrote things. And then from like March of 2016 on, I had to try to figure out Viola's story, which I rewrote, I think, 4 different times, like massive rewrites, huge tracts of narrative that are in my archives, characters that remain in the book but had a much bigger role, or just entire narrative threads written and then cut. And then I finally came back to the idea of Viola being involved in the suffrage movement, which had been an early thought that I had discarded. So dumb. I thought it would be too on the nose, like, oh, the men doing their independence thing and the woman doing her independence thing. And it's like, okay, it would have been too on the nose if I had done it badly, but the plan was to do it well, or try to. So that's what I ended up doing for Viola, was making her be a photographer involved in the suffrage movement.
I love this story as a writer and as a reader also, because I think it's so rare as a writer that the book begins with the first thing that you actually wrote as the writer. Like, I'm always telling people in workshop, and I know you teach novel workshops as well, but when people are fretting about the beginning and hand wringing and, you know, really trying hard to get it right, I'm like, it gets written last. Once you know your characters, you go back to the beginning and then you start all over again. And usually, you know, the beginning is the last thing to get written. But
Right.
here's like the beginning is the beginning. And as a writer, I'm going to ask, I remember you saying during the process of this that you had this quote, begin as you intend to go on. And I said that, but, you know, I still write that in my journal, like, begin as you intend to go on. And then I begin something and then I intend to go on that way. And then the intentions go to the road to hell, like as they do. But you actually sound like you went on as you began. Did you write the whole book longhand? How long did it take you to write? What was the process like? And did you get cold writing this? Like, was it like this great journey, or did you ever get tired of it and think, I just want to write about somewhere tropical, or, you know, Kilimanjaro instead of this? Like, I am sick of being in the frozen wasteland.
No, I mean, I actually did get physically cold, because again, I get cold very easily. So I'd be sitting at my desk with like sweaters on and a big scarf on and my coffee, and like, and I have these, someone knitted me, like, you know, fingerless gloves that I would wear sometimes, but it's hard to use a fountain pen. So yes, I wrote longhand. What I do, and I'm still doing this, I write first drafts longhand, and then after a day or two, but not usually more than 3, I will type those pages into, now it's lately it's Scrivener, or because I like writing on a Chromebook now, I use something called Dabble. But anyway, I type them into something that's, you know, archivable in a safe way. And in that process, I do kind of the first pass of edits, because what I'll do, I might write a paragraph that has 3 extra sentences in it, and I don't sweat it when I'm writing it, because I know it's like, it's okay. You can trim when you're typing it in. But I do, and so every now and then, especially in revision, but even in a first draft, you know, I'm typing material into the document on the laptop. Well, I might add a couple pages more, because there I am, and I'm just going to keep going with that. But I think if I were to look back through, and I have them, like all the notebooks, I think everything for the first iteration of Viola and the men was longhand.
And when you revised it, did you revise it also longhand, or did you then turn to Scrivener/Dapple and do it that way?
Both, kind of, because like the men I didn't really revise. That was more editing than revision. It survived, but the Viola stuff, it was rewriting. And so for the rewriting, yeah, it was back to longhand for chunks. And then sometime in the 3rd rewrite, maybe I was keeping enough that it was a kind of like, okay, we'll be in Scrivener now. We're going to cut and plop that into that little document and then see what we do with that. So adding some more. So it was, I left the longhand a little bit more as I got into the rewriting. But I know I like being able to go back and see that, oh yeah, it was that date. Oh, that's when I wrote those pages. Oh, and you can see, and oh, here I was writing quickly, and oh, here I was writing slowly. And then there's the places where it's like, this is awful, which I will write, because it's a way that I can keep myself honest. It's like, you keep going, because you say like, yeah, I know I know this is bad, but I'm not going to sweat it. But like the gods know that I know that it's not good. I'm under no illusion about my ability. So, okay, this sucks. And then you move on. So you can find all of the traces of that all over my notebooks.
I love that. It sounds like such an artistic process. I mean, like, I know that all writing is an artistic process, but there's something about creating something by hand, and that you have with like ink on paper, and that documents your footprints as you go, as you wander off in this direction, wander off in that direction. And Viola is an artist in this iteration. And she always was an artist, but she is thinking much more about her role as an artist in this iteration. Can you talk about the intersectionality of your interests as an author and also as a photographer with her story as an artist suffragette?
Well, let's think. I mean, the questions that she's facing are, without giving away elements of the story, but she wants to make a name for herself as a photographer. She's not able to go. I mean, she's someone, she has climbed. She's been friends with Watts when they were at art school together, and she learned how to climb. And then, so she's done stuff, but she's always reached a limit where it's like, okay, women don't go any higher than this. There were women explorers. There was, this summer we stayed at a hotel in Chamonix that was named after Isabel, I forget her last name, and she was an important mountaineer in that region, right around when Viola would have been climbing. So there were women doing this stuff. But anyway, she's encountering limitations on her abilities, even though she's very good at what she does. So I recognized that ambition, that desire to sort of push yourself and say, and she says early in the book, she's like, yeah, what I'm doing right now, it's not enough. It's not good enough. They're over in Antarctica. They're doing something that has the potential to be really groundbreaking. What can I do that can be as good as that? So I think, any of us who make art, these are the questions that we wrestle with all the time. Like, am I good enough? What can I do? Am I resting on my figurative or imagined or self conferred laurels, or am I really trying to push myself? And for me, that's like, I draw analogies for that from sports, because it's easier for me to understand when I'm pushing myself physically, because you can tell, you can feel it. And then I can sort of carry that over and be like, okay, remember how you went through that. That's what you have to do with your writing. Because you can't know always if you're pushing yourself fully as a writer. There's no physical markers. There's no, how would you know? You just like, this is, pretend I've got my fingers on a laptop keyboard. Like, this is me working hard. This is me working easy. It looks the same. How do you know? So if I draw from what I know physically from being in the mountains, then that helps me push. And so I kind of, in a way, Viola's sort of doing the same thing, because she has been in the mountains and she's trying to push her body as well as her art.
We have so many audience questions coming in, but I have a couple more of my own, folks. So if you would just bear with me. It brings to mind something that I loved about the book too, is that there is this sort of tributary of artist competition and artist envy in the book that like nobody talks about that much as writers. We all have like, writer FOMO, like writer jealousy, writer envy. It's a thing. And one of the things that I found so fresh and compelling about Terra Nova is that Viola, who is in love with both of these men for different reasons, her husband and then James, the photographer, she and James are both artists. They're both photographers. And it is actually a very physically demanding profession in 1910. And I remember my grandfather in his dark room and how physical photography was then. And when I was rereading Terra Nova, I was like, well, now if I want to enlarge something, I just go like this
right
on screen, right? I mean, even like the pro photographers I know who shoot for Nat Geo and Nikon now, they just enlarge like this. Right. So I wonder if you can talk a little bit about the photography in the book, and the revelation that it brings Viola to, both for herself and also the larger the implications for history And then also like talk a little bit about the competition between her and her lover, Watts, because I think that's so fascinating.
Yeah. So, I mean, you learn early on in the book that Viola feels envious or a rivalry with two actual painters who were called the Whitechapel Boys. I forget their first names at the moment, but Bomberg and Gertler. And they were kind of the favorites, I'm blanking on the word, but they were the pet artists of that period in a certain set. Excuse me. And they exhibited at the Whitechapel Gallery. And so she has this idea of, I want to surpass them. Why are they getting all the cred? I want to surpass them. And so I want to talk about the physicality of the photography. So Watts goes to Antarctica determined to use glass plate negatives. And I knew that at that time he could have used film. Herbert Ponting, who was Scott's photographer in the 1912 expedition, which was the Terra Nova expedition, which I took for the title of the book. Ponting he had a film camera, like a movie camera. So he took some movies. He had a small, easier to handle camera, but he also had something that required a tripod and all of that. I wanted Watts to have something that was physically demanding. I wanted there to be the stakes of, dude, we got to carry this stuff. We have to tow this stuff. All these glass plate negatives, they weigh something, and we're running low on calories, and you're telling us we got to carry this? But of course they have to, because it's the record of what they've done. So I wanted that to be physically demanding. And then for Viola, she has both options. And you see her early in the book in a suffrage march using a small camera that's glass plate negatives, but small. But she's also got this other bigger one that she has her companion, like retainer, the household retainer, who carries this sledge of camera equipment for her. So yeah, it's physical for her. You're made aware of the toxicity of the chemicals. Like people used to go blind if you were dealing with chemicals and it touched your eye, you'd go blind. There's a lot of physicality involved. And I know from just in the last couple of years, I've returned to shooting film as well as other stuff. And I don't take a ton of pictures lately, but I don't have a darkroom in my basement, but I can use a dark bag. And there's nothing to remind you of the physicality of photography worse than putting your hands in the dark bag along with the opener for the roll of film, the spool, the other roll of film, and your hands are in this bag. And you got to do all this. You got to get the film out of the can, put it on the spool, get the spool in the container, and close it. And you can't take your hands out of the bag until you've done all that. And no matter how many times you practice outside the bag, it's always harder inside the bag. And you're there and you're like sweating, and maybe you need to pee, or maybe you're thirsty, and it's like a half an hour is going by and you still haven't put the film in the canister. I've experienced that. But to go back to the rivalry, if you want me to like talk about that a little bit, refresh the question for me.
I will. So I'll refresh that question, and then I have one more, and then we'll take one question. So that question was about, like, we don't talk that much about writer envy, writer jealousy. When you're at the Grub Muse and Marketplace, somebody said, "What do you do about writer jealousy?" to a panel that I was on, and I was like, "Admit it exists, because it does." And every time a writer does well, no matter how much we love that writer, we're also like, I want to be doing that too. I want to be doing that cool thing. And the creative process is such a Ferris wheel, right? Like sometimes you're down, you're up. Like, if you know that your turn will come if you keep the faith. But like, talk about James and Viola and how they compete photographically.
Yeah, I think they're competing with each other when they're in the same place, before the novel begins. They are kind of supporting each other and competing with each other at the same time. So I would like to imagine that it's a healthy artistic relationship where they're supporting and encouraging each other. But then he has this opportunity that she can't have. And so there is this sense of, I need to find a way to do something that's better than him. And when he's there, he's thinking, what would Viola do? Because he, I think, already senses that she's better than he is. And so he's thinking there's a way that she sees that he can't even see. It's not even that he can see that way, but not execute as well. He realizes, or comes to realize, that he can't even see it the way she sees it. And so I wanted there to be this sort of rivalry going on, even though they're thousands of miles away from each other. And then later in the book, there is that it sort of comes to a head of like, who's better? I don't want to say, but like, who's better at pushing themselves into the unknown? I don't use this analogy in the novel, but it's what Keats calls negative capability. The ability, and he wrote it in a letter to Coleridge or about Coleridge, I forget, but saying the quality in a man of being able to be comfortable in uncertainty. I'm paraphrasing, but that's kind of how it goes. So that's the question for these two artists. The one who's going to be the better artist is the one who I think is going to be more comfortable pushing into uncertainty and the blurring of certain distinctions. I'll be cagey like that.
So interesting. Yeah. And the photographs are super interesting, both the ones that are taken in Antarctica and watching Watts's physical struggles to capture history as being made and to document that incredibly strenuous trip, and also Viola's explorations of what it means to be a suffragette in 1910, which mirrors in many ways the marches that we've seen in the past 6 years, which is another reason to read this tremendous book. Also, rivalry, people. Like, there's rivalry between Heywood and Watts as they go to the pole. There's rivalry between Viola and her lover. Like, how can you not want to sink your teeth into this literary, like, triangles all over the place? So the last question for me, and then I'll take audience questions, is you mentioned that you had been skiing when you were like 3 and that you got frostbite, and that you talk about, and you have excellent essays, by the way. If you guys don't follow Henriette on Instagram or subscribe to her newsletter, you should, because she wrote a great essay also about writing and sports and how those things intersect. But I would qualify you as, and correct me if I'm wrong, but like not only an athlete, but like sort of an extreme athlete or an adventure athlete. Like, you trail run and you ski and you do like, you're an incredible biker and you do all these things. You climb Kilimanjaro, like all the things that I aspire to. And really, so far, the pinnacle of my athletic aspiration has been cross-country skiing. And when I fell over, I needed somebody to help me do dead bug and get back up. And also wearing this hat in a hot tub when it was minus 17 degrees, which I thought was very athletic. But can you talk about how your athleticism played into especially the Heywood Watts exploration? Like, what were some of the moments that you took from your own life? And what was the time maybe when you were the most physically scared?
I'll start with that one because I anticipated being scared. And so I made a decision not to go into a particular situation. We were supposed to attempt a summit of Mont Blanc this past fall, actually. And as the date of the trip approached, and I knew we would do some preparatory climbs and hikes and glacier travel, and that the guides would sort of say, you're ready or you're not. I sensed that I might be physically ready, but not psychologically ready, because I anticipated being quite freaked out by a sort of knife edge ridge that you have to cross close to the summit. And the exposure is something that I wrestle with. So honestly, when I go to Antarctica a year from this January, the thing that scares me the most about that, even though I'm going to be on a very comfortable ship for 35 days, the freaky part is going to be crossing open ocean from New Zealand to Antarctica, and then a month later from Antarctica to Argentina. So I was very afraid of that. And I had already made up my mind. I'm not going to go. If there's a summit attempt, I'm not going to do it. In the end, we didn't do the summit. But another time that I was not afraid, when I should have been, is just, again, in September in Chile. I was we were on volcanoes skiing uphill, and we were going up this thing, and we had gone to just our boots with our skis on our backpacks. And we didn't realize it was a 60-mile-an-hour wind. And the guide said, it's not dangerous, but it's miserable. I was like, okay, miserable I can do. Dangerous is a different thing. But and so I wasn't afraid then, even though the wind was like, we had to crawl up the last part of the volcano because you would have been knocked over. And my one friend actually did get kind of partly blown off, and another friend grabbed her and helped her up. So I don't know, for me, writing the parts of the men just pulling these sledges step after step after step, that's something that, especially uphill skiing, which I've finally, after a lifetime of wanting to do this because my parents grew up skiing this way in Greece, uphill skiing has that quality because you're just going up. You just sliding your skis, which have synthetic seal skin mimicry glued to the bottom. You're just going, and you have to kind of like, if you start to get tired, you have to just kind of like, if you want to get to the top, you just got to keep going. And that's what these men had to do. And so I try to I fed that into the writing. And then when I began doing it, I was sort of pulling the writing into my experience and imagining, oh yeah, this is what Watson Haywood did. Just keep going.
Just one foot in front of the other. Climbing partway up the volcano is a phrase I think I can safely say has not ever been said on Blaze before. It's such a part of the book, guys. Again, even if you weren't interested in love and rivalry and love triangles and art and being a suffragette and, all of the luscious things that are in this book, just the sheer physical adventure story, should really rivet you. It's just such good reading. And I'll be thinking about putting one foot in front of the other when I am cross-country skiing in Minnesota in 2 weeks. And I'll tell myself to keep flying along.
Just keep going.
Great. Last question. Sorry, that was the last question. But dogs.
Yeah.
About your relationship with their great male and female relationships with dogs in this book. Obviously, very partial to this, but there is a specific part of your writing process that involved a dog that I would love you to tell us about, and then I will be quiet.
Yeah. So when I was writing the men's section, which was, December, and it was 5 o'clock in the morning, and I would come downstairs without turning any lights on, and I'd sit at this table, and around 7:30, after I'd been at it for a while, my then, how old was he then? He was probably 10 or 9. My golden retriever, Finn, the third of the golden retrievers, following in Scotty's footsteps, would come down and sit so that I could see only his eyes looking at me. And he would just sit quietly, and he would stare at me for, half an hour, 45 minutes. And he would sometimes make what in the family we called his radiator noises. He would just sort of go, because he didn't want to whine, and God forbid he would bark. And so he would just sort of make this quiet, polite plea for food. But I began calling him back then. He was starting in 2015. He was my writing supervisor, and he came every morning. And there are a lot of dogs in this book. I mean, there had to be, but I care a good deal about the dogs in this book, even though they don't all have a very nice time. And if you get to the end of the book, I think you'll see Finn's role in the story.
Yeah, I loved Finn. Can you please do the Finn voice very quickly?
I can't do it anymore. I can't do it. I can't do it anymore because we now have a cat, and my daughter has a cat whose voice I created, and she created my cat's voice, and I can't do it.
I remember it was like, lady, this is kind of.
It was like Finn was always claiming help from the Geneva Convention, so he would always say Geneva because he wanted to call on the Geneva Convention for all the crimes of ridiculousness that were being perpetrated on him
by humans. I think that my dog Henry, who I got shortly after Finn passed, I think the Henry voice, which is like, lady, everything is very peculiar and frightening. I think actually he owes a lot to the writing supervisor Finn, who we love so much. And again, if you follow Henry on social, if you scroll back, you'll see the eyes of the writing supervisors. So
Yep.
good. Okay, finally, I'm going to be quiet. Let's take some audience questions, please. Hank. Hi, Hank. We love Hank so much. Thank you for being with us today. Afraid of what on that journey? Isolation, impossibility of rescue, freezing impossible cold. What is it that becomes Scott-like for you? How do you feel after you succeed?
I think what becomes Scott-like for me is any time that I have an adventure. It's like what we call type 2 fun, which is fun. It feels like fun after it's over. So like last year, I've started doing the last couple of years, these races where you go, you skin up the mountain, then you ski down, then you do it 3 times. And there was one that I did where it was raining the whole time. And it was miserable. I was cold. I was wet. I was tired. I'm like the only person over 60 who does these races. And so it was like, hello, goodbye, everybody. I'll be at the end. And you, okay, prizes, yay, but I'll be slower. But for me, it was the after of, I had done it. And I was gradually warming up and drying out afterwards. That's sort of Scott-like for me. My whole life, that's been the thing of like, you go out, you have an adventure, you have kind of type 2 fun, and then you come in and you're like, oh, I did it. And with each time you do it, then yeah, you did that. So now the next thing is going to be easier because I've already done a skimo race in the rain. So bring on the next challenge. And I think the fear for me, I suppose, yes, impossibility of rescue is a thing. I mean, you make decisions in the mountains based on the ability to be rescued. There are things that we didn't do in the Alps this summer because it was like, the wind is too high. If anyone gets hurt, there is no possibility of a helicopter rescue. Therefore, we must head down. So that kind of thing you think about, anyway.
It's an amazing answer to an amazing question.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, love that. I love the type 2 fun. That might be for me like type Z fun. Okay, audience question. Did you ever read Shackleton's book, Endurance? I love Shackleton. Such a study in crisis leadership. Really interesting. Yes.
Yeah. Shackleton is the model of the leader. I mean, he did a lot of things right. I've never read the whole book, Endurance, because again, there's this sort of thing of like, I just want to dip in, but I don't want to be too influenced. So I don't even have a copy. I think I gave it to my son, so it's somewhere years ago. But I know that what he did was amazing, impressive, and Scott made some bad decisions in a different kind of expedition. But well, anyway. Shackleton did a lot of things right, all the things right, you could say.
And then a follow-up question. Can you talk a little bit about the crises just one of the crises that the men face in this book, in which Watts and Haywood kind of have different opinions about maybe?
Wait, do you have one in mind?
No, but like, just give us like maybe like one of the physical endurance tests that the men face so that the audience knows like this is the kind of life and death.
Well, I mean, it's as simple as there's a moment when Scott, for various reasons, he's angry and he begins sledging too fast. And I'm using the sort of the Britishism here because they're British people. And he begins going too fast and he starts to sweat, and you don't have access to his point of view. It's a close third point of view from Watts, but he gets a little dazed, and Watts realizes that he has become cold and this is very dangerous. And so there's a moment when Watts, who himself hasn't been feeling great, is realizing that Haywood he could become hypothermic. And so they have to do some rewarming, and it doesn't become dangerous, but it's that thing where all you need is to sweat in an environment like that, and that could be the end of you.
Mm-hmm. And I love this scene. I recognize this from reading this great book called The Children's Blizzard, which is kind of about like my own ancestors.
Oh, yeah.
How when people become hyperthermic and they're out of their minds, they start to take their clothes off. So you're in this, this negative temperature wasteland, and all of a sudden you start stripping.
Yeah, when they found Scott and the other ones in the polar party, they had begun to shed their clothes.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. It's such a counterintuitive thing, but people get very hot.
They get very hot. Yeah.
Yeah. As you're shuffling off the coil, So let's take 2 more quick questions. Meta has asked, what other real or imagined, quote, writing supervisors, end quote, have you had? What keeps you motivated, especially when you're working on something that takes years to complete? A great novelist question, I will say.
Yeah, I think besides Finn, I've always had, and I think we all do this, but I've had little groups of writers, little various and shifting communities of little teams where you know that these other people are also working on their project. And so like a NaNoWriMo where everybody declares that they're doing something, but this goes on year round where you say, okay, I know we're all here. And yes, writing a book is type 2 fun. Exactly. But we're all here, we're doing this together. So I know that, or doing a little retreat where, everyone is in a room writing, and you might say, ugh, I don't want to, I stayed up too late writing some stuff last night. I don't want to write this morning, but you know that in the other rooms of the house where you are, other people are writing, and that motivates you. And I think, I'm lucky to have a partner who, when I was writing this book, we were together, but we weren't married yet. And he would come over and he would say, I put this in my acknowledgements, but he would say, like, how are the boys? And I sort of felt like I had to have an answer for him. Usually the answer was, they just got colder today. They didn't do it. Did they do anything? No, they just got cold. They fell in a hole. They got out of the hole. They got cold. But he was a wonderful first audience. And I would read aloud to him every new section that I wrote. So he actually heard every page of the men's journey and most of Viola, because he just wanted me to, I would read it aloud to him. That was motivation, to have something new to read to Matt as I was writing it.
I love that. So guys, you could buy the book now and skip right to the acknowledgements and read the description of that process. Is so great. And it speaks to the importance of community, which obviously we believe in wholeheartedly at Blaze, that writing you have to do by yourself, but you don't have to do it in isolation in this way, that like there are other writers out there doing the type 2 fun or the type Z fun, and we're all trying to get to the South Pole somehow, like without eating each other, hopefully, or the dogs. Okay, last question. Anissa, yay. Did you start with plot, characters, or setting for the book?
I suppose it would be fairest to say I started with weirdly like plot, because I knew from the beginning that what I wanted to, well, no, this is character. It's not plot, is it? Because I wanted to write about a character who sees the flag and does the unethical thing. So that was character. That was sort of like, what did that feel like? Who are you? And then from there, the plot kind of unfolded.
Interesting.
And of course, setting was always going to be Antarctica.
And the setting is a character in this book. The setting is like a total freaking menace. Do you think, I was so playing this game with myself when I read, if I got to the South Pole at the expense of losing people on my team, like losing animals on my team, my own fingers, my own limbs, my own ears, like just the immense physical burden that they go through for years, literally, like time away from your own life. And then you saw somebody else's flag there. What would you have done? Did you ask yourself this? Like, what would you do?
Right. Oh, did I ask myself that question? Oh God, I don't think I ever did, because I could sort of see it from both sides of I could see both answers. Of course you would do the right thing. You would say, all right. As an athlete, as a sports person, of course you would say, hats off to you. Sucks to be me coming in second, but you won fair and square. But yeah, when you know that it's like we're talking about not just any trip to latitude 90, we're talking about the first trip, and you've made all these sacrifices, it's cost you so much. Yeah, what do you do? And then add the twist of like, do you know what's your awareness of how word is going to get back to civilization? Does that factor into your decision? How does that factor into your decision?
Really interesting. Because I think it's a very understandable moral dilemma in a way, especially because after you get to that point, you're like physically drained and not thinking correctly, even to the point of like keeping your clothes on when it's that cold. So
yeah,
it's
not simple.
Yeah, that's my favorite. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I don't think it's not that straightforward. I mean, of course, my reaction is like, of course I would tell the truth, but then like, wow, at what cost? Or, confirming what cost or negating what cost that you've already paid. I think it's a complicated question.
It's super complicated. And that's like my favorite kind of book, honestly, that has a moral complexity at its heart, that is wrapped in this incredibly muscular story. So that would be Terra Nova, which you guys should all order several copies of.
There it
Links
is.
in the chat. There it is. Yeah, it's a beautiful book. And I love this cover.
Very nice back. It has they did a nice job.
They did do a beautiful job. And, holidays are coming. So buy this for all the adventurers all the artists all the women all the men and all the people you love dogs. So, Henriette, thank you so much for introducing your incredible new book to us today. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It was so great. Thanks so much.
A joy. Like, we are so happy. And everybody, thank you so much for joining us today. And hopefully we'll see you tomorrow when I'm introducing my ridiculous podcast at the Fairmont Copley Hotel at noon. Okay. Bye.
Excellent.